think stuff to do with family overwhelms me quite a bit. You know, worry or stress.
Because he's never been able to get this straight. So it is a question mark over Harry. And
he was Prince Harry's father, categorically denying the claim.
No, I'm not.
What if the biggest royal secret wasn't a scandal waiting to explode, but a truth deliberately buried while one man suffered in silence for decades? Because that's exactly where this story begins, not with a rumor, not with the tabloid headline, but with a sealed envelope quietly placed on a table between two brothers who hadn't spoken properly in years. No cameras, no witnesses, no escape from what was inside. And here's the part that should make you pause. The answer in that envelope wasn't new. It had allegedly existed for years, maybe decades, sitting quietly in files while the world speculated, and one man carried the weight of a question that never should have followed him in the first place. So why keep it hidden? Why wait this long? And more importantly, who decided the silence was worth the damage? Because the damage was real. It started with a rumor that refused to die. A rumor so persistent it became part of identity itself. A whisper turned into a headline into a narrative, and a narrative into something far more dangerous, something people began to accept as possible, simply because nobody powerful ever stepped forward to crush it.
Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it. That's the bit that excites me, is that
the claim was simple, almost too simple, that Harry was not Charles's son, that he was instead the hidden result of an affair, a secret no one dared confirm or deny. And what was the evidence? Hair color, facial resemblance, a shared interest in horses. That was it. No documents, no timelines, no proof, just visual coincidences stretched into something that tabloids recycled for decades. And yet, silence from the palace. Absolute calculated silence. No denial, no correction, not even a carefully worded dismissal. Just nothing. And in that silence, the rumor grew teeth. Because silence doesn't kill a lie. It feeds it. And here's where things take a darker turn. The rumor didn't just live in newspapers, it slipped into private moments. Even inside the family. A joke casually thrown into the air by the one person whose words could have ended everything instantly. A joke that wasn't followed by reassurance. Not clarified, not corrected, just left there hanging, echoing. Imagine carrying that, not from strangers, but from your own father, and still silence. Then comes the part that makes everything feel calculated rather than accidental. The timeline. The simple, undeniable, almost embarrassingly obvious timeline that should have destroyed the rumor the moment it was born. The affair didn't begin until years after Harry was born, not months. Years a gap no theory could bridge. A fact confirmed publicly, repeatedly, consistently, and yet the palace never used it, never pointed to it, never ended the conversation with a single undeniable truth. Why? Because by now, this isn't about a rumor anymore. It's about a pattern where silence isn't neglected strategy.
But James Hewitt has always denied it, hasn't he? He has always said that the timing.
And then the story crosses a line that feels almost unreal, because waiting wasn't enough anymore. Someone allegedly decided the truth needed to be taken, not confirmed. A plan, cold and deliberate. Get close, gain trust, take a strand of hair, test it, quietly, secretly, without consent. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was intrusion at a level that feels almost surgical. And the target? An 18-year-old who had no idea his identity was being treated like evidence in a case he never agreed to be part of. The plan failed, or at least that's what was publicly believed. A warning, a quiet intervention. And then, once again, silence swallowed everything. No exposure, no outrage, no accountability. Just another secret disappearing into the same black hole where truth seemed to go when it became inconvenient.
Enough. We can all move on and get on with our lives. But if this continues...
But the story didn't end there. It never does. Because years later, the truth allegedly surfaced in a courtroom, spoken out loud for the first time. Not whispered, not speculated. Stated, and suddenly, the narrative shifts again. This wasn't just about selling headlines. This was, allegedly, something far more calculated, a slow, deliberate attempt to plant doubt so deep that it could one day be used as leverage. Not just against a person, but against a position, against a place in a system built on bloodlines. Think about that. Because if you create enough doubt around identity, you don't just question a person, you destabilize everything connected to them.
If this continues, then I'm naturally deeply concerned that what has happened to us What happened to...
And then comes the twist that feels almost impossible to ignore. A second attempt. This time, successful, a strand of hair obtained. Tested, results returned. And what happened next might be the most telling moment in this entire story. The results were buried. Not delayed, not debated. Buried because if they had confirmed the rumor, they would have been everywhere instantly. Headlines, front pages, global chaos. But they weren't, which only leaves one possibility. The result destroyed the rumor completely. And yet, nobody was told. So the question isn't what the truth was. The truth was simple. The question is why the truth was hidden. Because while the world speculated, while narratives evolved, while technology amplified lies into something that looked real enough to believe, the answer was already known, sitting quietly in files, untouched, unspoken, and Harry?
Well, can you hear that noise? Yes, it's the sound of the world's tiniest violin playing for Prince.
He was living inside that silence, not knowing the answer had already been written. And that's where everything starts to feel less like coincidence and more like design. Because if the truth existed all along, then the real story isn't the rumor. It's the decision to let it live. And just when you think the truth couldn't feel any more obvious, any more exposed, it becomes impossible to ignore the one detail that turns this entire story from tragic to calculated. The evidence was never hidden.
So serious, for decades some speculated Hewitt was Harry's dad. A rumor fueled by what...
It was always there, visible, documented, repeated by the very people who were closest to the truth. The timelines didn't just contradict the rumor, they destroyed it. The family traits didn't just weaken the claim, they made it look absurd. And yet, for decades, none of it was used. Not once. Not when it mattered most. Not when the damage was still forming. Not when a young man was growing up under a cloud that never should have existed. And that's the moment this stops being about what people believed and starts becoming about what people chose not to say.
It's clearly your dad rather than King Charles. Now, the timing...
Because by late 2025, something shifted. Not emotionally, not suddenly. Strategically, urgently, the kind of shift that happens when time starts running out and silence is no longer sustainable. Conversations that had been avoided for decades were suddenly unavoidable. And at the center of it, a meeting that wasn't about reconciliation, wasn't about healing, wasn't even about brotherhood. It was about control, about timing, about deciding exactly when the truth would finally surface and on whose terms. So when Harry walked into that room, he didn't know he was stepping into the final chapter of a story that had shaped his entire life. But William did. He already knew everything. He had the documents, the confirmations, the timelines, the context, and most importantly, he had something Harry had never been given clarity. And when that envelope hit the table, it wasn't just paper. It was decades collapsing into a single moment. Because inside, it wasn't just confirmation. It was exposure, not of a lie, but of a decision. The confirmation itself, almost predictable. The timelines aligned. The biology made sense. Everything pointed exactly where it always had. Harry was Charles's son. The rumor was false. Completely, undeniably false. But that wasn't what broke him. That wasn't the moment everything shifted. What shattered everything was the realization that this answer had existed for years. That the people around him, the institution, the advisors, the very system designed to protect him had known. Known while he was growing up. Known while he was being questioned. Known while the world debated his identity like it was public property. And they said nothing. Nothing, not because they didn't have the proof, but because they chose not to use it. And that choice changes everything. Because it transforms silence from absence into action. Suddenly, every unanswered question becomes intentional. Every ignored headline becomes strategic. Every moment of isolation becomes something that could have been prevented but wasn't. And in that room, the truth wasn't just about who he was. It was about what had been taken from him. Years of certainty, years of protection, years of being able to stand in his own identity without doubt creeping in from every direction. And then came the second layer, the one no one saw coming. The one that didn't just involve facts or timelines, but something far more personal. His mother, because buried inside those revelations was something that cuts deeper than any rumor ever could. She had known, she had spoken about it, not publicly, not officially, but privately, clearly, repeatedly. She had defended him in rooms where her words were heard, but never passed on. Imagine that. The one voice that could have anchored everything kept out of reach, not lost, not forgotten, just never delivered. And that's that's where this story stops being about the press, or the palace, or even the rumor itself. It becomes about distance, about how truth can exist and still never reach the person who needs it most, about how silence doesn't just protect institutions, it isolates individuals. Because for 30 years, Harry didn't just live without answers. He lived without knowing that the answers had already been spoken by the one person he needed to hear them from. And now ask yourself this. If William had all of this, if he knew, if he had access, if he understood the full weight of what had been withheld, then why wait? Why now? Why after everything had already unfolded publicly? Because this wasn't just about revealing the truth, it was about controlling the moment it became unavoidable, waiting until every version of the story had been told, until every accusation had been made, until every bridge had already been tested, and then delivering it quietly, privately, with no audience, no narrative control, no way to reshape it. That's not coincidence, that's timing. And the aftermath? Silence again. But this time it feels different, heavier, because now the truth exists on both sides. One brother who delivered it, one brother who finally received it, and between them, decades of something that can't simply be undone by knowing what should have been said years ago. Because here's the uncomfortable question that refuses to go away. Is truth still justice when it arrives too late? Or is it just another form of damage, dressed as closure? And maybe that's the real mystery. Not what was in the envelope, not even why it was hidden, but what happens now that it's finally been opened, and the silence that protected it has nothing left to hide.